In 1967, CBS made a shocking decision about Gilligan's Island. One episode went too far. It showed human sacrifice, violence, and things no kid should watch. The tribal chief wanted to throw someone into a volcano. Even worse, when the episode aired, parents freaked out. Phone calls flooded the network. The episode was yanked and banned from reruns. Today, we're exposing the dark secret that Gilligan's Island creators hoped you'd never discover. Sherwood Schwartz had a simple but bold idea. He wanted to create a show about 7 people stranded on an island with no way to leave. They couldn't escape, they couldn't quit, and they had to find a way to live together. Unlike classic survival stories like Robinson Crusoe, which focused on one person battling nature, Schwartz wanted to explore human relationships. He imagined a group of people from completely different backgrounds, each representing a different part of American society. Mr. Howell and his wife, Lovey, were the wealthy elite, used to power and luxury but completely helpless on the island. Ginger was Hollywood glamour, confident and beautiful, but in a place where fame didn't matter. Mary Ann was the wholesome Midwesterner, practical and hardworking. Gilligan and the skipper were the working class, one young and clumsy, the other experienced but often frustrated. The professor was the intellectual, logical, and resourceful, but unable to find a way home. Schwartz believed this mix of personalities would create a unique dynamic. He wanted to explore democracy at its core. Without money, status, or outside help, the characters had to rely on each other to survive. But getting the show on the air wasn't easy. CBS executives weren't convinced the audience would understand the premise. They worried it needed too much explanation. That's when Schwartz came up with an idea that changed everything. Instead of a long setup, he would tell the entire story in a theme song. The song had to be catchy, simple, and easy to remember. It had to introduce all 7 characters, explain how they got stranded, and set the tone for the show, all in under a minute. It worked. When Gilligan's Island premiered on September 26, 1964, audiences knew exactly what they were watching. The show quickly became a hit, but what many didn't realize was that its message went deeper than comedy. The 1960s were a time of major change in America. Civil rights movements, class struggles, and cultural shifts were everywhere. Gilligan's Island might have seemed like light entertainment, but underneath the humor, it reflected real social issues. It showed how people from different backgrounds could clash, cooperate, and form unexpected friendships. It also flipped traditional power structures. Mr. Howell's wealth meant nothing. The skipper's leadership was constantly challenged by Gilligan's mistakes. The professor could build almost anything, but he couldn't change their fate. The show's connection to history didn't end there. The pilot episode, titled Marooned, was filmed in Hawaii in late 1963. On November 22nd, the cast and crew were shooting scenes at Maloa Bay when news spread that President John F. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. At first, many thought it was just a rumor. They were thousands of miles from the mainland with limited communication. But as more updates came in, the truth set in. Kennedy was dead. The mood on set changed instantly, but filming had to continue. The next day, another obstacle appeared. Honolulu Harbor, where key scenes were planned, was shut down as part of the national mourning period. Schwartz had to get special permission to continue filming after November 25th, the official day of mourning. In some scenes, flags at half-mast can be spotted in the background, subtle reminders of the tragedy that unfolded while the show was being made. At night, the cast and crew gathered in hotel lobbies watching the news. They saw Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald live on television. They saw the country in mourning. Meanwhile, they were filming a comedy about castaways. The contrast was surreal, but Schwartz believed that in times of uncertainty, people needed an escape. He was determined to finish what he started. Even the WoW theme song had a complicated journey before becoming the version people know today. At first, Schwartz hired John Williams, who would later compose music for Star Wars, to create a tropical calypso tune. But it didn't feel right. The lyrics were different too. Instead of a 3-hour tour, the shipwreck was described as a 6-hour ride. Instead of Ginger being a movie star and Mary Ann being a farm girl, they were just secretaries. Schwartz knew the song needed to change. He worked with composer George Weil to create something simpler. He wanted a sea shanty style, something that felt natural and easy to sing along to. The result was the Ballad of Gilligan's Isle, a song that became just as famous as the show itself. One last change happened after the first season. The lyrics originally referred to the last two castaways as the rest. Bob Denver, who played Gilligan, didn't think that was fair. He insisted that Russell Johnson, the professor, and Dawn Wells, Mary Ann, should be named in the song. Denver even threatened to have his own name removed from the credits if the change wasn't made. CBS gave in. By season 2, the professor and Mary Ann were officially part of the lyrics. The casting of Gilligan's Island was filled with unexpected turns. Finding the right actors took time, and not everyone saw the potential in the show. The role of Gilligan was first offered to Jerry Van Dyke, a comedian known for his sharp humor. When he read the script, he rejected it immediately. He thought it was, in his words, the worst thing he'd ever read. He was worried that playing such a goofy character would ruin his career. Instead, he chose to star in My Mother the Car, a sitcom about a man whose late mother's soul inhabited a talking car. The show failed, but Van Dyke never regretted his choice. His rejection opened the door for Bob Denver, who was already famous for playing Maynard G. Krebs on The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis from 1959 to 1963. Denver had a talent for physical comedy. He could trip, fall, and fumble his way through a scene while making it look completely natural. That skill made him a perfect fit for Gilligan. Before acting, Denver had studied political science at Loyola University and worked as a teacher. Acting was never part of his original plan, but once he took the role of Gilligan, he became one of the most recognizable faces on television. Finding the right person for the skipper was just as challenging. The show's creator, Sherwood Schwartz, wanted someone who could be tough but also warm. The skipper needed to be big and imposing, but he also had to have a soft side. Alan Hale Jr. fit that description perfectly. Schwartz created a unique audition scene to test actors for the role. They had to play an unpleasant character while still being lovable. Hale nailed it. He had the perfect balance of authority and charm. Schwartz first noticed Hale at a restaurant. His loud, cheerful personality stood out. It was clear that he had a natural presence, and that was exactly what the skipper needed. Hale loved playing the role so much that he carried it into his personal life. In the 1970s, he opened a seafood restaurant in Los Angeles called Alan Hale's Lobster Barrel. He greeted customers while wearing his captain's hat and called them Little Buddy, just like he did with Gilligan. Even after the restaurant closed in the 1980s, Hale stayed connected to his character. He later worked with a travel company to help people book sightseeing cruises, a fitting job for someone who had played a ship captain for so many years. Tina Louise, who played Ginger Grant, had a very different experience. At first, she wasn't sure about taking the role. In 1964, she was performing in a play with Carol Burnett when she was approached about Gilligan's Island. She agreed to join, but only because she thought it would be temporary. Once filming started, she realized the show was not what she expected. Originally, Ginger was written as a sharp-tongued, sarcastic character, but Louise wanted something different. She pushed for a softer, more glamorous portrayal, like Marilyn Monroe or Jane Mansfield. Her biggest frustration came when she realized that Gilligan's Island was an ensemble show. She had expected to be the star. This led to tension on set. She often kept her distance from the rest of the cast. Bob Denver, in particular, became a source of conflict. Rumors spread that he had made unkind remarks about her, and their relationship never recovered. After the show ended, Louise refused to take part in reunion films. She distanced herself from Gilligan's Island for years. Only much later did she acknowledge its impact and the role it played in television history. Natalie Schaefer, who played Lovey Howell, had her own secret. She was born in 1900, but she often claimed 1912 on official documents. By the time the show's pilot was filmed in 1963, she was already 64. To keep up her youthful image, she had a special clause in her contract. It stated that she would have no close-up shots and would not be required to do physically demanding scenes. At first, Schaefer had no real interest in the role. She agreed to do the pilot only because it was being filmed in Hawaii, and she saw it as a free vacation. She was convinced that the show would never last. When Gilligan's Island became a hit, she fully embraced her character. Her refusal to do slapstick comedy worked in her favor. It made Lovey Howell stand out as the refined, elegant socialite, which added to the show's humor. When Gilligan's Island premiered on September 26, 1964, no one expected it to become a massive hit. Sherwood Schwartz created the show, and while critics dismissed it as silly, audiences saw something different. The first season ranked 18th in the Nielsen ratings with a score of 24.7. More than 13 million households tuned in every week. It even outperformed Bonanza, one of the biggest TV shows of the time. The secret to its success was simple. It was light, funny, and completely ridiculous in the best way. The 1960s were a turbulent time, and people wanted an escape. Gilligan's Island gave them that. The castaways found ways to make impossible inventions, but never managed to leave the island. The slapstick comedy and over-the-top situations kept viewers entertained. Families loved it, and kids especially couldn't get enough. Even when CBS changed its time slot, the ratings stayed strong. By season 2, the show was still in the top 25, ranking 22nd with a Nielsen score of 22.1. It seemed unstoppable. But in 1967, the series was suddenly canceled. The reason had nothing to do with ratings. CBS needed to make room for Gunsmoke, and Gilligan's Island was the one they cut. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. Gilligan's Island became one of the most syndicated TV shows in history. After its cancellation, reruns aired everywhere, reaching new generations year after year. Kids who weren't even born in the 1960s grew up watching it. The humor was simple, the characters were exaggerated, and the physical comedy made it easy to enjoy. Unlike the Dick Van Dyke Show, which relied on witty dialogue, Gilligan's Island was all about big, silly moments. Gilligan's clumsy mistakes, wild dream sequences, and impossible rescue failures became legendary. The show was never meant to be deep or serious. It was made to make people laugh, and that's exactly what it did. However, the episode Gilligan, the Goddess, which aired on April 17, 1967, became one of the most controversial episodes of Gilligan's Island. It introduced a disturbing storyline about human sacrifice. A tribal chief named King Kalani arrives on the island looking for a white goddess to throw into a volcano. At first, Mary Ann, Ginger, and Mrs. Howell see this as a chance to escape. They believe that if they are chosen, the chief might take them off the island. But when they learn the truth, fear spreads among the castaways. To protect the women, the men come up with a ridiculous plan. They dress as women and try to trick the chief into choosing one of them instead. In the end, Gilligan is picked and forced to become Gilana. The situation takes an even stranger turn when King Kalani changes his mind. Instead of sacrificing Gilana, he decides to marry her. The other castaways scramble to save Gilligan. They try everything from magic tricks to silly dances, but nothing works. In the end, Gilligan manages to escape on his own. He leaves behind his disguise, and when the chief finds the abandoned wig and clothing, he panics. Believing that a spirit has taken Gilana, he and his warriors flee in terror. Even though the episode played the situation for laughs, it didn't sit well with everyone. The portrayal of indigenous people as violent and superstitious reinforced negative stereotypes. The use of cross-dressing for comedy also raised concerns. It was one of those episodes where Gilligan's Island mixed humor with themes that felt unsettling beneath the surface. Another controversial episode, Forward March, aired on February 17, 1966. This one featured a gorilla throwing grenades and even hinted at nuclear war. The chaos begins when the castaways realize someone is attacking them from the bushes. Grenades land dangerously close, and no one knows who is behind it. Mr. Howell immediately takes charge, declaring himself General Howell, and forming a clumsy military unit. The group prepares for battle, but when they finally uncover the enemy, it's something no one expected, a gorilla. In a nearby cave, the gorilla has found leftover World War II weapons and is using them. The professor comes up with a theory. He believes the gorilla must have learned to throw grenades by watching soldiers decades earlier. Gilligan then manages to train the gorilla to throw the explosives into the lagoon instead of at the castaways. This seems to solve the problem, but things take a bizarre turn when the gorilla tosses a strange red disc. When it hits the ground, it explodes into a giant mushroom cloud. The image is a clear reference to nuclear weapons, something that was a sensitive topic during the Cold War. The episode ends with a classic slapstick moment. Just as things settle down, the gorilla throws a pie at Gilligan, hitting him in the face. While the story was meant to be lighthearted, it faced criticism. Some felt it made war and nuclear threats seem like jokes. Even at the time, the idea of a grenade-wielding gorilla was seen as absurd, but it also showed how Gilligan's Island often leaned into wild, exaggerated plots without considering their deeper meanings. Throughout its run from 1964 to 1967, Gilligan's Island also pushed boundaries with moments of sexual tension. Ginger Grant, played by Tina Louise, often used her charm to manipulate situations. She performed sultry dances and flirted her way through problems. Some audiences found these moments entertaining, but others felt they were too suggestive for family television. In episodes like Slave Girl, she used seductive moves to distract island natives. Marianne Summers, played by Dawn Wells, was portrayed as more wholesome, but she also had moments that raised eyebrows. Her outfits, especially her short shorts, were considered daring for the time. Some felt they pushed the limits of what was acceptable on television. There were also moments where Marianne played up her romantic appeal, using it to get what she wanted. This created an interesting dynamic between her and Ginger. The contrast between Ginger's bold confidence and Marianne's subtle charm became part of the show's appeal, but it also sparked debate about whether these elements were too much for a sitcom. One of the most uncomfortable episodes was Slave Girl, which aired on March 20th, 1967. In this story, Gilligan saves a native woman named Kanani from drowning. Because of her tribe's traditions, she pledges herself to him as a slave for life. This immediately creates tension. Gilligan feels guilty, but the other castaways don't seem to mind. Some try to take advantage of Kanani's devotion. Mr. Howell even suggests dueling Gilligan for ownership of her, which shocked some viewers even in the 1960s. Things escalate when Kanani's suitor, Ugundi, arrives on the island. He challenges Gilligan to a fight to win Kanani back. The professor tries to stop the battle by faking Gilligan's death with a curare serum, but things go terribly wrong. Kanani's tribe believes Gilligan is dead and prepares to cremate him on a massive fire. When he wakes up and sees the flames, he panics and jumps up. His sudden revival makes the tribe believe he is a fire god. Terrified, they flee the island, leaving the castaways behind once again. Despite the comedic moments, Slave Girl was widely criticized. The idea of human ownership was unsettling, and the way the episode handled indigenous customs felt outdated and offensive, even by the standards of the 1960s. The exaggerated portrayal of Kanani's tribe as primitive and superstitious reinforced negative stereotypes. It was another example of how Gilligan's Island sometimes ventured into territory that didn't age well. Tina Louise played Ginger Grant, the glamorous movie star on Gilligan's Island, but she never felt at home on set. While the rest of the cast joked around between takes, she kept to herself. She had expected Ginger to be the star of the show, only to find out it was an ensemble cast. Instead of a leading role, she was just one of 7 characters. That disappointment never left her. Her relationship with Bob Denver, who played Gilligan, became strained. Rumors spread that Denver had told people Louise was sneaking her boyfriend into her dressing room. That made her furious. On top of that, TV Guide reporters noticed that Denver refused to take pictures with her or interact with her off-camera. He never spoke publicly about their issues. He later said it was easier to overlook someone's problems. When the show ended in 1967, Louise wanted nothing to do with it. She refused to join the reunion movies and turned down offers to play Ginger again. The character was recast, but fans never forgot the original. Over time, Louise changed her view. She eventually admitted the show had brought joy to people and acknowledged its lasting impact. For years, fans believed there was a rivalry between Tina Louise and Dawn Wells, who played Marianne. The debate over Ginger or Marianne became legendary. Ginger was glamorous and sophisticated, while Marianne was sweet and down-to-earth. Viewers picked sides, assuming the actresses must have done the same. Both denied there was ever a real feud. Wells believed Louise had been misled about her role. She likely thought she would be the star, only to realize the focus was split among all 7 castaways. That misunderstanding may have explained why Louise kept her distance. Wells described her as professional but not particularly friendly. They weren't close, but there was no hostility, despite what fans thought. Louise's character was given more importance in billing and salary. She earned $1,500 per episode, while Wells made just $750 per week. But when it came to fan mail, Wells received more letters. Viewers connected with Marianne, seeing her as more relatable. That difference in popularity may have fueled the idea of competition between them. In the years that followed, both actresses came to appreciate their time on the show. Wells always spoke warmly about it, and Louise eventually recognized its place in television history. The supposed rivalry was just another Hollywood myth. While Gilligan's Island became a massive hit, its cast never saw much financial benefit. The show aired from 1964 to 1967, but its real success came in syndication. Millions tuned in to reruns, making it one of the most recognizable sitcoms of all time. Producer Sherwood Schwartz reportedly made $90 million from syndication alone. The cast, however, made nothing during the original run. Salaries were modest. Tina Louise earned $1,500 per episode, but Don Wells only made $750 per week. Adjusted for inflation, that would be around $7,500 today. Compared to later sitcom stars, like the cast of Friends, who made $1 million per episode, the difference was staggering. The problem was their contracts. At the time, residuals were not standard. The cast signed away any rights to future earnings. Once the show became a syndication success, there was nothing they could do. Wells later admitted that missing out on residuals was one of her biggest regrets. Even behind the scenes, there were money disputes. Elroy Schwartz, Sherwood Schwartz's brother, sued him over royalties for writing contributions to the pilot. The case highlighted the larger issue of unfair compensation in television. As if financial struggles weren't enough, the cast also had to deal with strict censorship rules. CBS had firm guidelines on what could be shown on TV, paying special attention to what Tina Louise and Don Wells wore. Marianne's signature look included short shorts and tied crop tops, but CBS insisted that her belly button stay covered at all times. Costume designers raised her shorts higher to comply. Ginger's gowns often had plunging necklines, but censors demanded changes or careful camera angles to avoid showing too much skin. Sherwood Schwartz found the situation ridiculous. He once joked that he couldn't get through a day without hearing complaints about Tina's tits and Marianne's navel. Despite the restrictions, the wardrobe team worked around the rules. Louise learned to subtly cover her stomach during scenes, and Wells's high-waisted shorts became an iconic look. The double standard was clear. While CBS obsessed over what Louise and Wells wore, male actors had no such issues. Around the same time, William Shatner freely showed off his abs on Star Trek, but Gilligan's Island had to follow stricter rules for its female stars. In 1967, Gilligan's Island was expected to return for a fourth season. CBS had assured the cast and crew that the show was safe. Some actors even bought homes near the set, thinking they had job security. But just as production was about to begin, everything changed. CBS suddenly canceled the show. It wasn't because of poor ratings or audience disinterest. It was because Gunsmoke needed a new time slot. At the time, Gilligan's Island aired on Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. It wasn't a top 30 show, but it was still beating NBC's The Monkees and holding strong. Meanwhile, Gunsmoke had been struggling in the ratings. After 12 seasons, its Saturday night time slot wasn't working anymore. CBS had planned to cancel it, believing its run was over. But William S. Paley, the network's president, had other plans. Paley was a longtime fan of Gunsmoke. To him, it was more than just another show. It was a symbol of CBS's success. His wife, Babe Paley, also loved it. When she heard it might be canceled, she wasn't happy. Paley decided Gunsmoke had to stay. The problem was finding a place for it in the schedule. CBS executives scrambled for a solution. In a last-minute decision, they chose to move Gunsmoke to Monday nights. To make room, they canceled Gilligan's Island and another new show called Doc. This came as a complete shock to Sherwood Schwartz, the creator of Gilligan's Island. The show had already been renewed. Now it was gone. The cancellation hit the cast hard. They had been promised another season, and suddenly they were out of work. But Gilligan's Island wasn't forgotten. It went into syndication and became more popular than ever. Reruns kept it alive, turning it into a cult classic. Over time, it became one of the most successful syndicated shows in TV history, leading to animated spin-offs and reunion movies. Meanwhile, Gunsmoke thrived in its new Monday night slot. The move worked better than CBS expected. Ratings climbed, and it stayed in the top 10 for 6 straight years. Instead of ending in 1967, Gunsmoke continued for another 8 seasons, finally ending in 1975 after 20 years on the air. Paley's decision to save Gunsmoke was personal. It wasn't based on numbers. It wasn't based on what audiences wanted. It was about keeping his favorite show alive. His wife's influence also played a role. Reports say she pressured him to make sure Gunsmoke stayed on the air. That added to the urgency of CBS's last-minute schedule change. The cancellation of Gilligan's Island became one of the most surprising moments in television history. A show that had been promised another season disappeared overnight. A series that had been struggling suddenly got 8 more years of life. Fans never got to see the castaways find a way off the island, at least not until the later TV movies. In the end, one executive's personal preference changed TV history. Gunsmoke became one of the longest-running dramas ever, but it came at the cost of another show that could have continued for years. It was a reminder that in television, creative success didn't always matter. In the end, the final decision was up to the people in charge.